Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the 64-bit update which has come for ARMA 3. Now, I wanted to condense this because it's one of those topics which you could go on and talk about, and probably some of you are wondering, why haven't I talked about this already? Why didn't I talk about this day one when it came out? It's the kind of thing which you would imagine a YouTube producer would be like, bang, let's get this video out straight away. Well, there's a couple of reasons for this. One reason why I wanted to wait until talking about this. The main reason is we wanted to actually test. We wanted to get some gameplay experience. We wanted to get not just feedback from myself and my personal experience, but experience from other players who all have different varying system specs. That's one of the biggest issues with ARMA, is that ARMA is, as we know, a very, very hungry game when it comes to memory usage and just generally how taxing it is. It's also another one of these games which has a massive quantity of variables in terms of what you actually get as an experience. Now, the game has been out at this point for a good 3 years, and it's pretty impressive that Bohemia have actually, sort of put the time and initiative into actually producing the 64-bit variation for ARMA. And so far, what I can tell you is that the result of that has actually exceeded our expectations. I think it would be fair to say that in today's world, many people tend to be pretty cynical. I include myself in one of those, especially when it comes to game developments. Nearly always when we see some change or update which promises so much, it ends up falling flat on its face or not living up to what they have promised us. Mainly because of, again, it comes back to usually marketing hype. They're trying to tell you this is going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and then when it comes, it's actually just a burnt piece of toast. But actually, a 64-bit ARMA, it's looking very promising. Very, very promising indeed. Now, just to talk a little bit about the gameplay here, this is obviously the footage that we had from the other day from that video called Burn It All. This was an assault on an airbase that the guys were doing, and I'm using this because this event actually helped us to understand just what we could get out of, the performance we can get from the 64-bit client. I'll talk about that as well in a moment. But just let's talk about what 64-bit actually is, okay? Now, the very, very kind of simplified short version is it's about how much memory you can use. ARMA is a very hungry game in terms of accessing data, and when with the 32-bit you were limited to only a couple of gigabytes of your RAM usage. Well, now with 64-bit the game can basically use all of the RAM. That means that it's accessing that data more quickly, and it's accessing it in a more stable fashion, because with ARMA often you'll get peaks and troughs where it's having to access more or less, often depending on how much action is going around. That's often why when you would see like this very heavy engagements or a lot of AI down at any one time, the game is having to access a lot more, and then you would just quite simply run out of memory. Now, we still don't really have a cause or an understanding of what was causing the FPS bug, but one thing that we had talked about before 64-bit even came in was that we didn't really know whether this was going to be any kind of fix for that. And to be quite honest with you, we still don't. But what I can tell you is that I have not had an FPS bug. I don't know anybody else so far who has had an FPS bug since 64-bit is out. I have heard from one or two people who messaged me on Twitter and stuff saying that they had it, but I often will say, are you sure that was an FPS bug, or was that just a system crash or a critical error? The only way you can really know is by looking into your RPT file and telling you whether or not it says at the bottom of that RPT file you have run out of memory. So that hasn't happened. That is obviously a massive, massive change to the game, because the FPS bug was actually starting to kill this game for me. It was actually making some missions unplayable for me. That is a massive improvement. The other thing which is a huge improvement has been the general stability of the game, and as I say, the reason I waited to make this video is because I wanted to find out, one, the kind of differences in missions that we could do, two, I wanted to find out what my own experiences were and whether I had any black screen crashes, any FPS bugs. So far not. And the other thing is I wanted to actually see live in a mission how the game performed. Now, the biggest change, people often say, does it give more FPS? Does it give more FPS? The answer is kind of, because this update, it basically improves things if you have a lower spec PC. If you've got a higher end spec PC, something that's similar spec to mine, you're probably not going to see massive improvements. But what you will see in terms of improvements is stability. That means you won't see such harsh peaks and troughs in terms of FPS drop. Okay, so if you were sort of if you went from like having no action to suddenly a burst of intense action, or suddenly having smoke grenades and stuff all thrown around you, you're not going to see that huge FPS drop off. You will see some frame loss, but it's not going to be such a severe drop off, and that means that the game all around feels more stable. And situations where you might have been getting like only 10 or 12 frames before, you know, we're talking about the really heavy action in an urban center or something like this, that situation is going to feel more playable now, and that is a big difference, and that's an important difference as well, because it will make a whole mission feel a lot more playable. Now, is it perfect? Is it, you know, does it stack up versus other games which are released? No, it's still going to feel like ARMA. It's still not going to be quite there in those sense. But when you think about the scale and everything which is happening in ARMA and all of the stuff that's going on there, it's still pretty damn impressive, especially for a game which is like 3-4 years old now, right? So what changes has this made to FPS? That's one of the core things people want to know. That's the thing that people are asking. Well, from people that I know who have a lower spec PC playing this game, the kind of guys who be often getting like anything between 10 and like 30. 30 being nothing happening whatsoever, 10 being in the action. You might think 10 is pretty unplayable, and it often is, but ARMA, because of the way the situations play out, you can often just about scrape by with it. But nonetheless, it's not desirable. After this update, those guys have seen their frames jump up between anything between 20 and 40 frames. So basically doubling the amount of frames they get. That's pretty impressive. Now, what about someone like myself, who has, I guess, the higher end spec PC for this kind of game? I have seen not a massive increase in frames. Some, but not a massive increase in frames. However, that doesn't mean that that's a bad thing, because what I have seen is a faster recovery of frames, and that's actually still pretty important. What that means is if I was right down in the middle of the action, you might be pulling like 30, 35, 40 frames. Now that's pretty good, because sometimes still in the middle of action I could drop down as low as 15 frames when you're right in the middle of it. Bear in mind that's often when I'm also streaming and recording at the same time, so using a lot, and what it comes down to is the game being able to use a lot more of the RAM now, so you just are able to access that more, which creates that more stable environment. Now for myself, what I've seen is that often when you were in an area, or if you're on a map where you had a load of AI down and a huge load of combat happening, if you were in one area, for sure you'd have a certain amount of frames. If you moved away, those frames would often increase, but across the entire server space it wouldn't increase that much. That's the difference that I've seen. So what I've seen is, previously, let's say I was in an area like right in the middle of the action, I'm getting like 30 frames. If I was to move away from that, it might jump up to like 40, 45 frames. We're assuming you've got like 20, 25, maybe even 30 human players onto the server there as well at the same time. Well, now, if I was to move away from that action, okay, I could see it much greater increase, maybe double that increase. We're talking 65 frames, something like that. So a huge recovery of frames when moving away. Overall as well, we've seen just a much more stable environment. Now this mission that I did here with the airbase assault, this was really a test. I was pushing pretty hard here because it, again, for someone who's just watching this, you might not kind of understand the pressures that are involved in terms of the amount of AI versus the amount of players down on the ground. But having done quite a lot of Zeus missions at this point in time, having a hell of a lot of AI down, loads of explosions happening, lots of human players all around, all assaulting the base, air combat coming down. Now again, it may not look like I have tons and tons of units down right here, okay, but in a while I bring in a load of reinforcements, there's RPGs, there's a ton of automatic fire. So all in all, and bear in mind there were airstrikes happening down here which destroyed Hinds on the ground. We had 4 or 5 aircraft all exploding simultaneously, plus a separate firefight happening in 2 different locations all at the same time, and everything was still staying stable and fine. Those are situations which in the past when we have done missions have actually caused multiple players to crash out because they've just had memory loss. They basically, the game has been trying to load too much data in terms of what's going on, and those people have just basically crashed out. Nobody crashed out. We haven't had that problem. Now this is not the only mission that we've been doing. I did a mission, a big mission, again, not something which was like this in terms of loads of intense explosive action, but I had down on another mission anything like 130 AI. And for anybody that doesn't know, when you're getting up to around that amount, that's usually where you'd see a big frame hemorrhage from many players, and you tend to get a lot of complaints from people saying, I can't play like this, I'm getting a ton of frame drops, blah 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 blah. Well, from all of the guys, I've been speaking to the guys this week, all of the guys I've been playing with have been saying, I didn't have any problem with this mission, no problem with this mission, had a good time, didn't have any issues, frames were stable, mission felt stable. So it's all been positive. It's been a huge increase, and it's actually really exceeded our expectations. Like I say, we were very cautious because, again, you know, not wanting to ride that hype, not wanting to get overexcited and then be disappointed, you know. We have seen just generally a really great improvement in the quality of the gameplay. Now, I just want to say this is early. This is like the first week or two of this, so it doesn't mean to say that we're not going to encounter some problems. But so far, things are looking really good. There's another issue as well, another issue which does seem to have been resolved, and that is to do with the XMLs. Now, the XMLs are those little icons, like the custom player icons people have. They're like the ARM patches. When you're in Zeus, those custom XMLs pop up above players. So you see like a little icon appear above somebody when I'm in Zeus mode, like a kind of unit marker. Okay, now as far as I can tell, we had determined, and also thanks to Bohemia giving me a heads up, it seemed like those XML markers were actually causing the major black screen crashes that I was getting sometimes in Zeus missions. And it was essentially like those XMLs were creating a critical error for Zeus, and it would black screen crash me or other players out. That's another thing which does seem to have been resolved with this update, and that was actually noted in their notes as something which was being fixed. So there have been multiple fixes of huge critical errors in this update, and I can only really cross my fingers and say I hope things stay as good as they are right now, because if they are, that's a great improvement for this game. And that's really all there is to say, guys. So all in all, it's been a huge positive improvement. It's a shame that it took this long to come, but it has been worth the wait. Tell me your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching. Any questions as well? Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time, guys, for some more ARMA 3.